Children of Earth Day One. It's a lot.
I guess I'll just say mine first because I really don't have anything to say besides Yanto has a white trash family and that's it.
Yes. Oh God, no. I think they're called chavs in Britain. Is that right, Rob?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically like the the British version of like redneck.
I watched Kingsman once.
Yeah, so you know all of British culture. Yeah, from that.
Yeah.
That movie is the most accurate depiction of Britain there's ever been. You watch Harry Potter, Kingsman, and Doctor Who, you know everything about Britain. Overall thoughts, I'm just gonna say, that's all I got.
Act 1.
I liked it a lot. This is one of those things where I get what you're saying. It's the beginning, and this is a miniseries, and miniseries so often do function kind of like movies, where episode 1 isn't necessarily its own self-contained thing. It is part 1 of a larger narrative. So, like, I have a lot of little things that I liked, and one big thing, which was basically, like, Brianna and I talking to each other about this one thing for like 20 to 30 minutes in the middle of the episode. Your reactions. Like, as soon as the kids, like, start speaking in unison, first of all, you get so spooked.
Weird.
And, like, as soon as Gwen is like, oh my God.
Yeah, actually, Gwen's just looking at the kids and she's like looking around. She's like, oh my God. And, okay, yeah, same.
You don't remember a lot of details about this, which is why, like, I'm going to avoid talking about future episodes. But as soon as Frobisher steps in and, like, as soon as you recognize it's Peter Capaldi, you get, like, war flashbacks to his whole role.
Wait, that was Peter Capaldi?
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
You're just like, poor man.
I want to say that I like this episode specifically because I think it like sets up the tension really well, but I honestly can't tell if that's just because like I think it does or if I'm remembering how this turns out. And so I know that like I should feel tense.
Well, like, one little character moment that, like, you noted and that, like, I probably wouldn't have even noticed when Jack comes back after getting shot twice, and Yanto's like, did they kill you? And he's like, yeah. And Yanto gives him a hug after that, and Jack gives this face, and you're like, you can tell that he does not know what to do with that. This is, like, the first time in however many years or centuries that someone has, like, treated him dying as anything more than just, like, a slight inconvenience, himself included.
Yeah. I mean, the people who are like close to him know about it, I guess, but he doesn't ever like, it's been long enough with this happen that he doesn't even really care. Like, he'll put himself in harm's way just because he knows he'll never like really die, but it's still horribly traumatic. And here's Yanto who's like, let me do something for you. Let me try to make you feel better. And Jack is just like, that's a nice feeling. Maybe take it back. I don't want it.
Like, we paused the episode just to talk about this thing at length, is Gwen's conversation with Rakesh. I think is kind of the crux of this whole story in a lot of ways, and it's one of the things of like, this is the upside to having Torchwood, is getting to have these kind of discussions when something big happens that does like uncover the alien. Doctor Who would not allow us to have this. People are like killing themselves. People who are like really religious. Rakesh says like one of the people he treated had like a suicide note that said like, science is one. She said she saw her place in the universe and it was tiny. They kill themselves for that reason. And Gwen's like response to that, like something that you'd imagine the Doctor or a companion saying, and like keeps in line with like in series 1 and 2, Gwen is the heart of the show pretty much, where she's the person who's like, the universe being bigger doesn't have to give you the same reaction as like you being smaller. And it's like, it's a really interesting philosophical question of like, you discover that the universe is so much bigger and like sentient life is so much more prevalent than you ever imagined. And like human beings are not alone or special in the universe of being able to think and like socialize the way that we do. Doctor Who, like intrinsically, like always, takes that as a positive. The thing that Torchwood lets us do, just being as dark as it is and being as centered on just normal people as it is it gives us the perspective of like, oh, it's not just that aliens exist and that's weird and scary. It's aliens exist and that means that human beings aren't special, which means I'm even less special, which means what's the point of living anymore? And it's just this really fascinating, depressing conversation.
I told you, all the people in the show are just Aaron Burr. Like, they've had a brush with greatness, but they never get past that because they can't. They're just regular people. The companions, on the other hand, have the opportunity to really like explore it and how it can change their lives. But people on Earth are just like, so what now? Like, what am I supposed to do?
something that we didn't really talk about when we were doing the Satan Pit episodes, but another element of Lovecraftian horror is like cosmic insignificance. And they didn't really go into it that much in those episodes because we were dealing with a giant demon Lucifer monster, among other things. This idea that we're like mites on the back of some kind of giant organism that we don't even understand the nature of. I really like how they dealt with that in that conversation, because they don't really have many chances to deal with it besides that. Usually in Doctor Who, because like you got a much bigger perspective on it through the Doctor and the TARDIS and that kind of stuff. But they also don't really ever take a breath in Torchwood, because these people are semi-special in their own ways, being part of Torchwood, and they can't really look at it. So you really just see this dude who we think at the time is just a regular guy talking about what regular people are experiencing. And that conversation, regardless of what ends up being true to that concept, and I really like that about the episode. That was like, I agree with you guys. It's like one of the best parts of the episode is that one little conversation. It was just like a little character moment, right? Like no action.
Just grounded and real.
Yeah.
Sink into the episode as a viewer who like could conceivably one day far in the future experience something like this. Like Doctor Who is full of things that like really just can't be conceptualized, especially through that like really small character interaction, is force you to conceptualize what it would actually be like instead of romanticizing it.
Yeah, it provides you with an emotional hook to kind of get you attached to the characters and their struggle.
I like they put a bomb in Jack, set it off in 5 minutes.
Great transition.
And then it's actually 5 minutes of screen time before it blows up.
Not Gwen finding out she was pregnant.
And that will come back to haunt us when Reese finds out. I remember that.
Oh yeah, you told me before you told Reese.
It's not really a huge argument, luckily, or else it would just be torturous.
It's still like an overreaction.
He gets to be helpful this episode. Hooray! Proud of you, A+.
I should have like more to say about this episode, but it's pretty much just a blanket. Like I really like it. I like the whole series. I'm excited to watch it.
Really fantastic at building tension. I think the sequences, the children start mysteriously acting in unison and then switching back to normal are very creepy because you just don't know the source of it, which I think is always a good thing in horror when you don't know what's causing this.
Tangible consequences. Like we open with like a guy driving down the street and like kids have just stopped in the middle of the street on the way to school. We later find out that not all of the cars did stop and some kids did just die in traffic because they stopped in the middle of the street.
Look both ways before you get possessed by aliens.
They established, I think, from the beginning that Jack and the British government in 1965 sold some children to these... Well, we don't learn that Jack was involved till later, but we learn the British government in the 1960s basically sold children to these aliens in exchange for, I think it was a vaccine for flu, making this very relevant. Maybe the same thing will happen next year. You don't know in real life.
It would be 2021.
But of course, it comes back to bite them because, of course, they come back wanting more, knowing that, oh, these people are weak, give us these children. But they later do have that discussion in the Prime Minister's office with discussing it. And the Prime Minister says that it's not his business. He doesn't want to be involved because it's a matter of the past. It is sort of this thing about the past coming back to haunt you, and you get the same thing with Jack too. I think the thing with Jack being involved in it is it shows that he's had such a long life that there's just so many things that he's done and forgotten about, and I do think they touch on that later. It's just like so many bad things that he's had to do. I think that's a good part of Jack's character, that they make him an incredibly flawed one who's had to do some seriously messed up stuff in order to save the planet. It basically establishes Torchwood as a very dirty business.
I don't know if the mic picked it up, but Brianna mentioned maybe part of the reason Jack doesn't mind dying is that it's like a form of self-punishment. I think that's absolutely correct.
What they did with Rupesh in this episode is both like awesome, but also super evil.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing about Torchwood is that they really want to show like the consequences of not being immortal and fighting the kind of stuff that the Doctor fights. I get that they like want to dwindle the cast, but you got to bring in another character too, or they're literally going to run out of people. And just doing this with him in the first episode and giving you that sense of, oh, is it going to be Gwen 2.0? And then, nope, I'm a cartoon supervillain. I kill people in basements.
The fact that they revealed, too, that he killed all of those patients, I thought was a great twist.
I also really like that they blew up the Torchwood base. Not just the bomb thing, but the fact that they like blew up an established set to kind of like establish a new tone was really, really good. It's a cheap and effective way to kind of show that you mean business in a story, is to just literally destroy the previous setting so they can't go back to it.
I think the best thing about it is that it happens so abruptly too.
And like it's so sad with realizing that just gets blown up later on. Like
I never even noticed that. Like my first time watching through this like episode, or even now, like I probably would have missed that if you hadn't pointed it out.
she comes into the base, she gets on the computer, and there's a little picture of Owen like taped to the side, and she just gets destroyed later. Is really sad.
That the Weevil from the past 2 seasons that they kept as like a pet is now dead, and they just don't acknowledge it. Also, it's quite funny in the series 2 finale, Jack put Gray in that cryogenic chamber. Yeah, one day I might wake him up.
He got blown to bits. Oh my god!
No. Talk about that. Like,
Well, good thing we'll never have to see that terrible actor again.
That's really dark.
wow. Okay, yeah.
At least we'll never have to see the terrible acting again. Mhm.
Like we talk about like tone and bouncing between tones a lot in these episodes, and like going from the emotional high that is Yanto and Jack realizing that Gwen's pregnant to he has his hand on the thing and it just so happens to coincidentally like spot the bomb. Oh no! And then the mood completely shifts. It's like, get out now.
That's a plot convenience I actually think works quite well.
It's a boy.
It
It's a
makes
bomb.
It raises the tension how lucky they get. And if they'd waited like even a minute longer, they would all just be dead. And like the fact that Yanto just is so desperate to stay there and try to like shut the bomb off, whereas Jack like picks him up. Get out.
Like awkward back and forth. Like, I really care about you. Do you really care about me? Well, I don't know. I'm not confronting my feelings on the matter because I'm immortal and you're not. It's a whole like situation, and he literally just like in a physical display of his own emotions, just picks him up and yeets him. He's like, just get out. It's like, well, I have to get you away from me because I care about you. So like, stop trying to get this close. And Yanto is just not getting it. And like, even back when we got those like character like origin stories, he was not getting it. He was like, let me join Torchwood. Let me help you. I can be useful. Let me in here. And Jack is just like, no. Like the entire time, all the way down the line, Jack has just been like, I think not. And Yanto is just completely steamrolling over that.
And that will only end well for him. Conversation between Yanto and his sister. I really like how they handled Yanto's sexuality in that scene.
Is that his sister's husband?
Right?
Not that part, but the part before that.
The biggest.
Okay, here's the thing. That guy was clearly like still friends with Yanto. I didn't get the sense that he was like saying that to like be an I think it was like a sort of a term of endearment.
I got the sense that he was clearly okay with it because he was like joking about it.
This guy's always been a bully, and Yanto's just like, you're also a nice guy. My sister married you, so like, fine, I guess.
Like a really awkward family dinner where you have your family that loves you, but they're like super conservative, but they want to be supportive, and they're like, good job being gay.
Yeah, that's not exactly what he says, but I don't think we can repeat it.
You get the sense that, like, I think Brian's right, that, like, this is a guy who maybe has, like, or had conservative viewpoints, but, like, really does like Yanto, and they have, like, kind of an, like, uncomfortable comfortability to them.
Yeah, there's, like, a weird dynamic between them, but also the way that he describes his own sexuality, where he's just saying that, like, it's not men, it's just Jack. I'm gonna make this a little bit personal. As somebody who recently, like, within the last year, like, discovered I was bisexual, that kind of spoke to me in terms of like my experience. It wasn't like an entire gender, it was just specific people within that gender and specific types of people. You don't really see a lot of that, but to see it so well put after seeing like Willow's and other types of people where it's just like, I'm gay now, I never loved men, ignore my multiple year relationship with Oz, please.
That's such a weird thing. They literally have her say, I'm gay now.
Yep.
It's really weird. Brian went to a completely different place because I'm watching this show on Disney with another character named Willow that also happens to be dealing with bi characters right now.
I thought it was so good how they handled it so cleanly. Like it was clear that if they weren't talking to somebody who knew about this, they had done a lot of research on their own and like really looked into people's experiences with it when they wrote it. So I really liked how that went. And it was another really human moment in the episode that I really liked. And it makes me sad because we all know what happens later, but the rest of the audience doesn't. That's all I'm going to say.
There's a line here that's really mean, and I'm going to come back to it. Foreshadowing. Jack and Yanto are, like, early in the episode having a back and forth about something. I forget, like, what gets them onto this topic of conversation. You die like a dog, and then Jack's like, to Yanto, you die like a dog.
Yeah. Oh my god. I completely forgot that he said that too. That was so dark. Just imagine him in a couple episodes standing there and being like, hey, remember when you said this to him? And he'd be like, shut up, Gwen. Not the time.
For that conversation, I don't think. Again, like our conversation like got really existential when we were like, how do you define insignificance personally?
Insignificance is being Tosh and being forgotten about the episode after you died.
I'll remember Tosh if no one else does.
Owen gets a picture, Tosh gets nothing.
I think Tosh gets mentioned in the Stolen Earth because she designed that thing that shields them. It's to make up for the actual finale where Tosh got a goodbye video and Owen got nothing. It just ended with a message saying dedicated to Tosh. It's like
The fictional character Tosh.
Homer Simpson does at his workplace. Which
Yeah, no, that's what we were mentioning, yeah.
Do it for her.
do it for Tosh.
What about the other guy? No one cares about him.
Don't do anything for Owen. He can probably hear us right now. I think he's still alive, even though he's Atom Dust.
Like, you have like an ear left.
That's Miracle Day. That's
Weird.
literally the concept of Miracle Day, actually.
Could you imagine if like Owen's consciousness is still technically alive somewhere?
I think we'll have more to say on all of the other characters in the
Except for Rapesh, because he's dead. He was there.
story is pretty well executed, and as you said, he had that great moment with Gwen where he's talking about the religious woman, and then he gets killed. Thank God, prick.
Yeah.
I think the guy gave a good performance. So.
Oh, yeah. You bought that he was
Definitely.
Gwen 2.0 right up until they revealed that he was a serial killer.
I forgot. I knew that he was bad, but I forgot, like, in the moment that happened, Jack just gets shot in the back. I'm like,
I was like,
That was unintentionally funny for me, watching Jack get shot over and over. Like, he just gets up and he's like, what's happening?
Lucy, you've got to start this video with, like, a compilation of Jack getting shot, and it's, what you say?
That song is going to be
Hate Bill
Imogen
Murray,
Keep's
he's gonna
lasting
start off.
legacy because of that one scene in the OC.
Yeah.
Yep,
He doesn't remember it, so he just thinks that some of those government agents killed.
I
Rapesh.
think he even
Rapesh.
sees Rapesh shoot him.
Yeah, he wakes up and he's like, oh man, they got both of us.
I would expect Jack to be slightly smarter than that.
Shot from behind, and then he wakes up and then gets immediately shot again, and then he wakes up again, and Rapesh, he doesn't have any clues to put together. Oh no, I turned my
Yeah.
back, and now we're both dead.
I would watch a whole episode that was just like the mystery spot, but instead of time rewinding, Jack just wakes up because he's immortal. Like that Supernatural episode where Dean keeps waking up because he keeps dying. But just have Jack keep waking up and keep going through his day, trying to figure out who's killing him over and over again.
I didn't watch Torchwood. I'm just saying Lucy should make like the thumbnail, or somebody should make the thumbnail just the South Park, you're gonna have a bad time. or the Undertale, you're gonna have a bad time.
Well, on the topic of our boy, he got wrecked. Like, I don't know what they were thinking, what they were doing. They literally had this man skin and toes, minus the skin. He was like raw nerve, touching a steel table, handcuffed, like this is incorrect. Like he suffered for that, and then on top of that, I don't remember her name. The woman literally came in, waited until he was fully formed as a human, screaming, looking like doom. She waited until he was fully formed and like back to normal to come in and go, I'm not telling you anything, and then cover him in cement. Do not know why. And then finally he gets out of the concrete, like Yancho kind of like beats him off the cliff, and like he's fine. But like he gets up, and you can see the fear of God in this man. Like he is. That's it. That's the last straw for Jack Harkness. He's done. That's my opinion on that. I was horrified, but the episode was great.
So yeah, she had a lot of strong feelings about Jack being held in post-explosion, like, reformation mode. Yeah, that's pretty horrifying. And, like, trapping him in a giant cement brick is certainly a way to go about transporting someone somewhere. But she also mentioned while we were watching that little bit where after Gwen and Reese get in there and the lady like has them cornered and is like gonna shoot them, and Ianto comes in and steals Jack with the forklift, and Gwen as they leave just like sticks her hand back in and gets one last little shot in. It's like that's how you know that Gwen Cooper is ridiculously petty. It's like, I've got to get one last attempt.
Yeah, so all that happened, definitely. I mean, Jack as well must have been suffering really bad. I think actually there's a scene where you can see him reforming, like organs and everything, like putting themselves back together, and he's screaming in pain. It's like, I don't know whether this is worse than what happened to him in Exit Wounds, where he just gets buried alive and keeps waking up.
This is definitely worse. His consciousness, his body coming back nerve by nerve after an explosion.
I don't know. At least that was over within a day, whereas with Exit Wounds, it was like 200 years of like consciously being buried alive and covered in soil. And I don't know. I think Jack's just suffered a lot in general. That's me.
You prefer your torture to be lengthy or painful?
Regardless of how painful it is, if it's over quicker, probably prefer it. But both of them, it's hard to pick.
I mean, that's really the only thing to really talk about in the episode is basically watching Jack suffer. Also, some of the stuff with Glenn and Reese, we'll get to that.
I'm looking over my other notes for what Brianna said, and she's like, she really did not like the joke at the start of the episode where it's like, if she's anti-terrorist, I wouldn't mind being Uncle Terrorist. Took me a minute to even get what the joke was supposed to be. It did not land at all.
I forgot about it. It was so bad.
And like she also made mention of in that scene when they're just looking for Jack's body and they just find the arm. Again, that's one of those things that they would never do on Doctor Who. It's like it's such a raw, like taking the magic out of it. It's like that's a thing that happens in real life. It's like after an explosion, people go looking for bodies and they just find body parts and they just kind of have to move on.
I think that's what Torchwood was kind of created to do. It was to be like the much more gritty alternative, I think. Like that's what it was supposed to be, but the early seasons were basically Doctor Who, but with swearing and sex.
Yeah, like Children of Earth goes harder on that than anything else. Where it's like that discussion that we talked about in the first episode between Rapesh and Gwen, where it's like this completely other viewpoint of the Doctor Who universe, so it's just completely grounded. Any sort of wonderment is completely taken away because it's not even just that seasons 1 and 2 were like Doctor Who, but with sex and swearing. Seasons 1 and 2 of Torchwood do have moments of genuine wonder to them, of where the characters do stop and be like, you know, for as much horrifying stuff as we deal with, there is a layer of like appreciating the fact that aliens exist, and there is a kind of beauty to the stuff that they encounter sometimes, even if it ends tragically. Children of Earth is not about that at all. Children of Earth is 100% cynicism 100% of the time.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah.
Sometimes Russell T Davies, he just gets really dark for some reason. I thought Chibnall also co-wrote it.
Chibnall's not a part of Children of Earth at all.
I thought he was involved in all first three seasons.
So did I, but apparently he's not.
I'll look it up some more later, but I don't know, this just feels very dark and bleak and just torture. So far, I'm actually not feeling it, honestly.
We do have some funny moments, though. Like the kids, Frobisher's kid going, we want a pony. We want a pony.
That's definitely something kids would do, too.
It's one of those little things that, like, sells for you the fact that the kids do not understand the gravity of what's happening. For their parents, seeing them do that, you imagine they would actually be straight up scared for a moment. But the kids, they don't understand that anything is going on. Like, they just stop, and as soon as they start again, it's like nothing happened. They really don't understand the gravity of it at all. There's also the bit where they bust in. We're looking for Yanto Jones. Johnny is on the bed, butt naked. Well, you're not going to find him in my bed, will you? I'm a married man.
It's like when you're first introduced, I feel like, you know, you think, oh, he's going to be a bit of a douchebag, isn't he? But I don't know. I think he actually turns out to be quite good. He has a lot of moments of bravery, too, throughout the story, which I was quite surprised by, actually. You think he's just going to be like a worse version of Reese or whatever. But, no, he's like pretty decent.
The way that Brianna would describe him is like, he's the kind of guy who you can tell has a good heart, even if he absolutely was probably a bully as a child. Yanto sends his sister like the message to like meet up, and she's like hesitant about it, and he's the one who's like, you're the only family he has, like you've gotta go. He's great.
It's one of those surprising scenes that adds depth that you would not expect from like certain characters. Like, yeah, I think Davis is like generally quite good at that. That was a good moment for him.
They also have Reese going off and being a jealous jerk.
This series, Reese is more tolerable than he was in seasons 1 and 2. He only has his moments of being annoying. Otherwise, he's like quite decent most of the time.
When they're like trying to be undercover and the guy's like hitting on Glenn, he almost completely destroys their cover just being a jerk. I'm like, God, man, bring it down. You know it's all fake.
It shows Reese just cannot control himself in any situation. Like, he's very off the wall, bad-tempered. He's just going to fly up handle at any moment.
It just feels like, are you this insecure that you can't even deal with your girlfriend who you know is pretending to be someone else?
Wife. They are married. It's like, you're right. Like, he should be even less insecure because, like, that's not your girlfriend anymore. You're married. You have no reason to be this worried about it.
Yes, it's like, oh, she's going to run off with this guard that she's just playing to begin with.
It's not even jealousy. He's just, like, mad at the guy that he would even dare do it. That thing that some people have where it's like they're not worried about their partner being unfaithful. They're just mad at whoever for having the audacity to speak to them.
Yeah, it's very possessive and creepy, though, to me. Like, oh my God, a guy talked to this woman that he doesn't even know has a husband.
My God, that guy can talk to women. What's going on here?
A guard should also not be like trying to chat up an Undertaker, which is what he thinks Gwen is.
I still don't blame him for trying.
What
Probably
is?
the prettiest girl he has ever seen gone through there. Let's be honest.
Well, probably gone through there specifically. Probably yes.
Oh God.
There's this very quick shot at the start of the episode where Gwen is like getting targeted by a sniper and it like is directly on her eyeball, and I thought that was cool. Like, that was a very neat little tense bit of, oh my God! Two things that apply to the first episode, but I didn't comment on them, which is one, I really like the musical motif for the 456 that like pops up whenever the children start like doing their thing. Like, I think that that's just a really effective bit of music. The 456 have not shown up on screen at all yet. We're 2 hours in and they don't really have a screen presence, but you feel them whenever they're talking through the kids, and part of that I think is the music. Is like there's this very difficult to describe sense of something is just off screen, something exists just outside of the borders of what we're watching. It's really foreboding and really terrifying. Also, Peter Capaldi, I maintain that Peter Capaldi is one of, if not the best actor to have played the Doctor, and this whole thing like sells that even more. Like, I never see the 12th Doctor when he's on screen. Never. Like, he's in this whole series, I'm like, there's never a moment when I go, oh, hey, that's 12. It's just Peter Capaldi playing this completely other character, and that speaks to his range and just the way that he is able to fully inhabit these characters.
Yeah, he's
What's even
definitely
more
one of the better actors.
Playing Malcolm Tucker in the thick of it, and so he plays another politician, which I think is why he was kind of cast in this. And that's like more of a comedy show, but you'd expect, like, when watching this, to think, oh, that's Malcolm Tucker. I never thought that at all. Again, I think it speaks to his, like, really impressive range.
Yes, he is very good. I think he's very underrated, like Doctor Who actor. Like the other guys, I mean, they're good too, but like when you watch David Tennant and other stuff, sometimes it just feels like, oh, he's playing just a different version of the Doctor. Like Good Omens, he's basically like the Doctor again.
Because he was in Jessica Jones, I did kind of think that. Sometimes it feels like he's playing just evil 10th Doctor.
But it's just his mannerisms and stuff too. It just feels very Doctor Who-ish.
We get a little bit of backstory for Yanto with like the whole his dad pushing him on the swing and like breaking his leg, to where she's like, it's not Dad's fault. It was an accident. Just get over it. And he's like, he pushed me too hard. He always does. Again, this is something that Brianna mentioned, is like part of that perspective that Yanto's sister has is that she and Johnny are kind of white trash. In the best way possible. This is Brianna's word. Just she's like, she has the best of intentions when they talk about it, and like the fact that he broke his leg and she wants him to be able to move on, but she just doesn't understand what she's talking about. Again, it's sort of the same thing as her husband. Like, they have a good heart, but you can tell that the perspective that they have is not entirely sympathetic in the way that Yanto needs. They both have kind of bad habits. Don't make them bad people. They can't see things the way that Yanto needs them to. And she's not really able to be the family that he needs, and it's really unfortunate.
I did kind of get the sense that they both have different perspectives on the dad. Like, it seemed like she had a better relationship with him than Yanto did. So she was like willing to like excuse any bad things he did. But that's sort of what it came across to me when I was watching it.
He seems like just a more sensitive guy. And if you're living in a tough white trash kind of family. That doesn't always work out. Like, he sees something that his sister doesn't, because she's also married to white trash and she's kind of embodied it, I guess, but he's just not that kind of person. He's a different kind of person.
And I know this might sound ironic coming from me, because I'll sometimes complain about things being too sort of like oppressively like nihilistic and depressing and like too grounded emotionally in sort of this sad feeling. Again, sort of speaking to this being what we were kind of promised with Torchwood fully realized, taking this premise and going as hard as possible with it, and just everything is terrible. It's sort of the same reason that I like 42, Doctor Who episode. I kind of just enjoy taking these characters and putting them in a situation where they do not get to rest at all. And like an episode like this is just one thing after another. Like the characters are on the run. Jack is being tortured. Like Gwen and Reese and Yanto like just have to run around constantly. They can't stop for anything. Everyone is out to get them. And like it's this constant sense of tension. Like in 42, no one gets to relax. Everyone has to be on their guard constantly. And everything is going wrong. And it just makes for really compelling television. To just want to get to the end where I can relax. And that carries you through the episode. As opposed to Planet of the Dead, where we spend 50% of that episode just sitting around doing nothing.
Sweating in a bus.
That would be a better title of that episode. More accurate.
Sweat in a bus. There we go. That's the title.
I thought it was great. I love this whole series, and I think this is a very action-packed. It's sort of definitely, I think, the most action-packed one of the 5. The rest of them, luckily, don't have a massive emphasis on that. Even as Nick said, I feel like you're constantly in the sense of, like, everybody's in danger. And we get a lot of really good story progression here, as opposed to the first one, which was just the setup, and it was a good setup. But here, we do get a sense of more of what is going on. Again, ends really well, like the last episode, with a cliffhanger that really does lead into the next episode. I've got no complaints about this one, really.
The sheer, like, pants-pooping terror of going from we are coming to we are coming tomorrow.
The high points of the episode were Skeleton Jack, Gwen trying not to stare at Jack's junk.
Yeah,
Make it sound like a very boring episode. You like phrase it that way.
I like our podcast is kind of making like Children of Earth look like it's very overrated.
I think what this does is like really highlights how maybe Brian's way of going about it is the right way to do so. To use what's become the common terminology in like binge culture. This is better as a 5-hour movie than it is as 5 episodes of TV. Like this one does, I think, absolutely work better sort of as one big thing. That said, I don't regret choosing to talk about it episode by episode. Even if that does work to its advantage structurally, I think it works better to sort of digest each one separately. I don't know. I feel like that's how it works for me.
Okay, we are now talking about the 3rd episode of Children of Earth.
This is the episode where we end a montage with a dedicated scene of everyone applauding Jack when he gets his outfit back, because how are you not going to applaud an outfit that fly?
Oh, sorry. Also, before we get into talking about this episode, I liked Lois as a character, and I think they introduced her in episode 2.
Actually, was she introduced in episode 1? I could have sworn she's been here since 1.
Yeah, she's been since the beginning.
Oh, yeah. No, she was kind of in the background, but they kind of like formally introduced her as a power player in this episode.
But no, and like it's good that you bring up Lois, because I was kind of like not really very engaged with her the first 2 episodes. I feel like she is kind of the least noteworthy part of episodes 1 and 2, but in this one, the whole bit with the eye cams and just how tense the actual moment is that we end on of like Frobisher talking with the 4, 5, 6, and Torchwood is watching, and like Lois has to sort of maneuver her way around the room and like covertly communicate with them. Like you feel tense because of the whole situation. You feel tense for her. Like what if she gets found out? How is she gonna make this work? The scene that we end episode 3 on is like really, it is obviously the midpoint, the turning point of the whole story. And it's where things really pick up, I think. And it's just a bunch of people and one giant alien talking in a room.
I like how they fit in little bits of comedy there too, with like check the moth. I think it was the sentence and that they typed in, and she's like, the moth? Then Gwen turns and is just like, shut up. And then like fixes it.
I think it's sort of like a lot like Hitchcock's Rear Window, in that it's like very tense because it sort of positions you with that character as an observer. So you
Yeah.
sort of feel like you're in there. Really, really adds to the tension because it makes you feel like you're there and you could be caught out. That's what I really felt while I was watching it, and it was great stuff.
My only problem with like when they get into the room with the alien stuff, I feel like that scene just kind of drags on forever.
I don't feel that. I felt like that's really the most I've been engaged since we started.
It was definitely a drawn-out scene.
I think it's because we finally got here.
I guess because I just haven't been really feeling any of this, and then we got to the alien finally. I was like, okay, and then it just kind of drags. I mean, I know what you're going for. If you're more engaged, I can see how it could be pretty good.
This scene for me was like carried on Peter's acting because just waiting for him and not knowing whether or not the 456 was just going to kind of violently like interject in the conversation again really ramped up the tension for me while I was watching it. And it's just that kind of that drawn out anxiety inducing silence.
456, I thought the voice was quite terrifying.
Yeah. Do we know who voice acted the 456?
No, but he did a good job.
It's fantastic. There was just like, there's this bass tone that's inherently terrifying.
Simon Poland.
Nobody I know. Good job. Good job, Simon.
We don't know who you are.
That's the perfect word for it, honestly, is anxiety. But what really sells that scene for me is that I'm really empathizing with Frobisher and I'm really empathizing with Lois. And so, like, there's two people in that room more than anyone else in the show are just, like, normal people who are pretty much standing in for the audience. And it sucks that they have to be the ones stuck with this job of talking to this thing. Where, like Brianna mentioned while we were watching, she's like, if I were in Frobisher's position, I would quit my job that day. I would say hasta la vista, I would be out of there. Yeah, honestly, like it doesn't become clear until the next two episodes just how screwed over Frobisher is. Like just how much they're like scapegoating him and throwing him under the bus. He's expendable because he's just a normal guy. And that's also true of Lois. And so two people who we've spent a good amount of screen time with, who we've had reason to believe are ultimately decent people, are the ones who are unfortunately doing what Jack should be doing, or what any number of like government officials should be doing. They're stuck with like this really unfortunate position that they are not prepared for.
It's all because the Prime Minister doesn't want the blood on his hands again.
It's very salient social commentary, but I want to bring up H.P. Lovecraft again. The 456 almost never on screen, and I love that. Why doesn't Doctor Who do that more? Perfect in a way because it's a tangible threat there right in front of you, but it's cloudy. Can't really make out what it is. All you see is these really threatening claws. And later, some people that are in not a great situation, but just those tiny little glimpses that you are perfect in setting up the threat and also letting your imagination do more of the work with the 456. He's just a voice, and he's not even really communicating via voice, if I remember correctly. He's got like speakers, the machine, or in himself.
It's such a little thing. It's the kind of thing that another show would just glance over and not talk about at all.
Aliens are blue humans.
I mean the sense of like part of the tension of the scene and part of the goal of the scene, the reason that Lois is there in the first place is so that Torchwood knows what's going on. Brianna just handed me a note that said, I miss Harriet Jones. The new Prime Minister is the worst. Just to briefly tangent and then get back to my point, like the scene where the 456 comes down like the column of fire and it just cuts to him staring at it through the window. He looks like a complete monster. And it's like he knows everything that's about to go down. And he's like, I'm just glad I don't have to take part in that. Part of what adds to the tension is that like the goal of the scene is for Lois to make sure that Torchwood knows what's going on, because it's not actually speaking, it's speaking through the speakers, so Lois's eye cams don't pick that up. That creates this little bit of like, oh no, now Gwen and Ianto and Reese and Jack are not going to be privy to all of the conversation. So that's another thing that Lois has to take care of. It's just a conversation, but so much is at stake in this moment.
I agree. And I would like to also say that these episodes are really not nice to Ianto.
It's about to get so much worse.
It's close.
Felt so bad when he and Jack are having that discussion because, again, like we did with episode 1, where Ianto's like, did they kill you? And like gives Jack a hug and Jack does not know what to do with that. Here he does it again where Ianto like takes a moment out to like ask Jack how being blown up felt and like, did it hurt? And you can tell that Jack is not used to being asked those kind of questions. And he's just kind of trying to roll on with it. And I like that Ianto ask what a normal person would ask who's not like watched Doctor Who, which is like, I don't know why you're immortal. What happens if you like run out?
And then he does something else that a lot of Doctor Who fans would do and propositions Jack for sex immediately afterwards.
Reese being recast to like blue ball plans. Great.
Yeah.
If you've just watched Torchwood and not Doctor
Have
Who,
I?
you don't fully grasp that Jack is like fixed in time immortal. You might just think, oh, he's got potentially finite number of times that he can come back. Jack here lays it out as like, no, I do not die. I will never stop. I just exist.
Big giant head, then you'll just stop.
I may or may not become a face.
And then Yanto says, so when I die of old age, you'll just move on. It's like, oh, why?
Jack would be like banging some other guy like the next day, probably. I imagine, like, you know.
My name is Jeffrey. No, you're Ianto too.
No.
Do you know they made a memorial for Yanto in Cardiff? Like, literally like a grave site for him where they like put pictures up and everything. It's like very dedicated fan base.
Where is Owen and Tasha's grave?
I have my own personal memorial for Tosh.
Tosh gets a memorial DVD. Owen gets a memorial picture. That's it.
Owen is his ashes are in like a Coca-Cola can right now.
I don't want to think about that.
1 second during the scene, which is like the one problem that I have with the 456 scene is that the tension is a little bit undercut by the Nickelodeon slime sound effect. I forgot that we used that, and it's like of all the stock sound effects that you could have used.
The human kid that's sort of been turned into like one of them or whatever.
Yeah, the massive.
I will say it's the same problem I had with the Toclafane in Last of the Time Lords, where they literally just look like baby Davros. Can they not come up with like a new design or just what?
But getting back to the slime scene though, when I thought the alien like
Gross. Lucy.
He did. He the script.
Boo!
it's Torchwood, your mind
The
goes for
children.
everything that gets off on orgasms and stuff. I mean, it's not impossible to think he might have had an accident.
You know that we're
Literally.
talking about Torchwood, and I know that we ended a whole discussion of Doctor Who talking about genitals. But reminder that I'm trying to run a family channel, people. Speaking of fine, wholesome family content, this is also the episode where we imply that Frobisher has cheated on his wife at least once already. So Lois needs to be brought into the room with them. They're saying, Lois, you just stay here and keep taking notes and do stuff. And she's like, no, I gotta go with you guys to be in the room. Subtly implies the other lady who's there with them that Frobisher requested her there in a private discussion and makes it sound very like that. And she's just like, you're not the first, they always think they're the first.
I thought implying that she wasn't the first to discover government secrets or whatever.
Oh, she discovered some government secrets, all right.
The line is absolutely meant to say that she's not the first to have gotten in bed with somebody at least. Because I don't know. The thing is, that line is absolutely referring to inter-office romance or sex or whatever. I don't know if it's specific to Frobisher though. Is the thing. The way that she delivers it makes it seem like it's absolutely about Frobisher specifically, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is. I think you're just implying that, yeah, he's a cheat. So,
which is such an unfortunate thing because he's otherwise a really likable character.
He is complicit in genocide, though.
Not even likable, but empathetic, and genocide thing is a thing that pressured into, which doesn't excuse it, but it's that's something you could totally believe that a normal, otherwise decent person in his position would end up.
Yep. He's almost an anti-villain in that regard, and it kind of goes to show how in these kind of situations the morality kind of slowly grays and the characters kind of get pulled into it.
Is that it's a symptom of the bureaucracy. This miniseries is about the bureaucracy. The aliens have just landed and we're at the tail end of episode 3. That's how much the real problem here isn't even the aliens, it's the government. The whole cheating on his wife thing is so independent of that, and it's I'm weird maybe in that infidelity is a thing that will sour me on fictional characters more than almost anything else.
It's like when they kill dogs, it's they can murder rooms full of people, but the second they take out Fido, they're dying. It's not even a discussion.
Yeah, it's really weird. I'm the only person I know who has that specifically with as soon as a character like cheats on their significant other, that immediately like stops me from being able to empathize with them. I don't understand why they would make that part of his character.
I feel the same way, and I've talked to other guys who also feel the same way.
Where somebody cheats on a significant other, even though the total creep, it seems like everyone still has a problem with it. I'm just gonna say, always guys who seem to have the biggest problem with it.
It edges into that kind of like honor culture bullshit.
I'm trying to like put it into words, and because you brought up Oz, and like Oz is kind of
I'm relating everything to Buffy. God.
the point we make with Oz is that it's absolutely a bad thing that he does it, but also he's not kind of in his right mind. That's the weird thing of like being a werewolf, like being part animal. He almost can't control himself. Physiologically, he can't control himself. And it's like the same thing that I have sometimes with characters when they get high or drunk. They kind of stop being themselves. Like literally their brain chemistry has been altered to the point where they are not of sound mind and they might as well be a different person. They are still responsible for their actions. Like it's a layer of difference to it. Like the thing that always is my go-to example, and this might allude to like what Lucy's saying, maybe I have a bit of gender bias about it. Mary Jane from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, not a single movie goes by where she is not making out with someone while being attached to someone else romantically. And the movies are never critical of that. And like the problem here, Buffy is critical of Oz when he cheats. And like when he cheats, that is the end of their relationship, and he is not made to look good for having done that. What Raimi's Spider-Man does and what this show does with Frobisher is like the character will cheat on their significant other. The media does not comment on it. MJ kisses people while she's dating other people, and it just happens, and we're not meant to think about it. Frobisher cheats on his wife, and we're just not meant to think about it. We're just supposed to move on.
Does the same thing to her in like the third movie, and like was supposed to like
Gwen Stacy, that's his moral event horizon. But I completely disagree with everything you said about Oz. Just like every single thing. The act of infidelity in that episode in particular doesn't actually end his relationship with Willow. It's the scene afterwards where he packs up all of his crap. Like Willow's still invested and still wants to try and work things out, but he decides to end things. And also, as Ian from Passion of the Nerd has said, it's not that he's inebriated in some way. It's that he does not understand himself as well as he thinks he does. He hasn't gone through the Jungian process of individuation where he absorbs the wolf into his greater personality. So it's very hard to talk about it because that's a very, very fraught version of the same topic. I think it's meant to be this quick and easy way from point A to point B that the writers didn't really want to think about. And I think that is a missed opportunity because you can really delve deeply into that topic and deal with the morality of it. Whereas here it's just like, he's an and that's it.
Often in the case of infidelities, obviously I'm not talking from experience, but obviously in the case of infidelities,
sure, like, Rob, sure.
Rob has a wife that he has not talked to any of us about.
Like only 22, so that would be great progress. But anyway, usually in the case of infidelities, it happens when people are in like sort of a high stress job where they're like constantly away from their families. And I sort of get the feeling like Frobisher is kind of like fits into that category.
Also, we have Rose Tyler who just cheats on Mickey with tries to cheat on Mickey with 3 different people. And it's
Rose is also another good example, yeah.
Oh yeah. Boy, we're talking about this again.
No,
hooray!
Your problem is it's not so much they have a character that cheats. I think it's they're uncritical about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's certain, like if the person is like terrible, like who cares if they got cheated on or something like that? It's like they're already horrible or something. But
Hitler got cheated on. Oh no!
But when it's like a good person, like Mickey gets cheated on, it's like and they
or
never,
Willow.
Well, something Brianna made me think about is that, like her comment about her not being the first, we don't know how long ago this was. This is obviously not something that would come up because it's Torchwood, and for as much time as we spend with Frobisher, we're not going to get this deep into his life. But like, we don't know how long ago the other incidents were. Does his wife know about them? Have they discussed it? Has he changed as a person? Like the last person that he cheated on his wife with could have been years and years ago, or it could have been last week. We don't.
I feel like if it's not the first person, the woman that's always standing up for him in the kind of bureaucratic proceedings, I feel like they had a thing in the past. That's why she so like ardently defends him later on when certain things happen with guns. But I definitely think that she was involved in some way with that, and that it's more of an ongoing thing. Because it seemed very personal when she said, like, you aren't the first.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, just like plant a flag on the floor with his face on it and then like walk away. Like, we get it. That's what I got from that scene anyway.
The ending's very, very big twist.
But I just want to say, like, the impact of we want 10% of
God, yeah.
children on the planet. And again, like, the fact that they've been using the children to communicate.
Give me your babies.
That's already been very terrifying. And, like, we already get the implication before they outright confirm it, I think in a later episode, that they have no reason to do what they did with the "we are coming" and like having all the children point. They're just like using petty intimidation tactics. We get the implication from like the very first scene of the show that what Jack did with the kids was like hand them off to the aliens. And like once they arrive, we get that implication more and more until Jack just outright confirms it. I gave them a dozen or so kids as a gift, and that has big implications for Jack.
That was his Hyperion feed on them moment, I feel like. I mean, this show has always been kind of a British angel anyway, but that definitely felt like his evil human moment.
But I think just to the effect that I'm talking about, part of it is what I mentioned earlier, which is the aliens don't properly arrive on the planet until a good ways through episode 3. We've spent a couple hours already now where the main conflict of this show has been supposed to be the government. So we almost haven't had time to think about what the aliens themselves actually want. Like, what are they coming for?
Exactly, and that's by design. It leads back into the Lovecraft stuff, because if you want to make your villains scary, you do two things. You keep them out of the limelight a bunch, but also you build them up as being this nebulous background presence. So while we have the primary villain at the beginning is the government, for some reason, you have this nebulous threat in the background that only pops up every so often, and it does it in a big way, like taking over the children's brains. It just reminds you that it's there, basically, and then it's going to show up soon. I liken it to the Reapers in the Mass Effect series, where they'll occasionally just drop in a dude and be like, hey, by the way, you're all going to die soon. Go on and fight these random aliens that nobody cares about. See you in a bit to, like, eat your kids.
Very
Bye.
So, like, the show has been redirecting our attention away from the aliens and all of the characters on screen. But if you're paying attention to the alien side of things, then you can maybe put together, okay, what happened is all of the kids who were like with Clem that we saw at the very start of the show, they got taken. We can assume that the aliens took them. But it's like, even knowing that and even having thought about it in those terms, you're not quite prepared for, okay, what do we want? We want 10% of the children on the planet. Give them to us. Oh, suddenly the actual stakes of this narrative are super clear. And it's like, oh God, that's bad.
While at the same time still being like, what the hell are they using this for? Because, like, we don't know until the next episode why they want the kids. So at that point, it's just like, what are they going to do? Are they going to, like, mulch them? Are they going to, like, eat them? Like, what's going to happen? Why do they want 10%?
What I think Rob was initially referring to is when Jack comes in and we just get it outright confirmed. He just straight up gave the aliens the children. And he says specifically as a gift. As a gift, that means it wasn't by force, it wasn't by coercion, and like we get more details after this episode. But in the context of this
sort
episode,
of trade.
We end with episode 3. It's, as far as we know, Jack says as a gift. That might mean this whole thing is Jack's fault. Like, what prompted you to do that? And we don't get an answer until the next episode.
I think it can be safely assumed in the context of this that the fact that they want more kids, it was more of a conciliatory gesture. Like, here's this thing, please go away, do not ask for anything else, and we will let you leave with these kids.
Russell T Davies wrote this as a metaphor for people giving politicians money and then saying, oh, we won't demand anything else, then demanding more later on.
You give in to the demands of this person, and then they promise they'll leave, and they come back again asking for more. And obviously RTD has always been huge on political commentary. That's why he's always got, like, news media heavily involved whenever there's an alien invasion, why everything's seen through the screen of, like, BBC cameras or whatever on the news. And in this case, it's pretty cut and dry that they're trying to show, like, the corrupting influence of governmental power. Because even with somebody like Frobisher, he's a pretty decent guy, but he does some bad in this, and like you sympathize with him, but you're also like, if I was in that situation, I would hopefully not do that at all, you absolute bastard. Especially the
that
last
seemed
part.
really to the government themselves, because if you look at the next episode, they end up in like a completely impossible situation.
It's the whole like heavy is the head that wears the crown thing. Is the corrupting influence the fact that you have the power, or the fact that you're in these situations where there's no good choice?
Is it power corrupts, or does power just reveal what was already there?
Do we need to sacrifice the kids, or do we stand our ground, die with our honor, and lose all of the kids?
This is all absolutely true in terms of the narrative as a whole, but I just think it's a very deliberate word choice, like to put the audience in a certain mindset at the end of episode 3 to have Jack say as a gift without any of the added context. What that makes me think, like, again, putting myself in the shoes of someone who hasn't watched this, is right about the metaphor for government, and like, you'll give them money because they asked for it initially, but who's to say, with just the first 3 episodes worth of information, they weren't volunteered? So, like, who knows that the aliens asked for children and that Jack didn't just decide to do this, or somebody didn't decide to do this arbitrarily and Jack did it on their behalf.
And we don't even know what happened to the kids at that point, so it's really a great big question mark at the end of it. He's meant to be seen as villainous for teaming up with the big bad, but we don't know what the context of that situation was. It's very good that we're kind of thinking about this, Nick, from how you're describing it, the kind of fresh perspective of somebody going in for the first time, because we have, I guess, foreknowledge going in of what that scene is, and it changes it a lot for me on repeat viewings, because you know that he had a somewhat understandable reason for what he was doing, but at the same time we have a lot of additional context that we wouldn't have had in the first run through of all these episodes. You just had to kind of assume based on character and past actions, like what everybody was doing that thing for. I also want to say, as a completely separate topic about this episode, still love Ianto's brother-in-law. Best character in the whole episode.
In my opinion, he's a better version of Reese. I think he's a lot more likable while still retaining a lot of Reese's, some of his qualities. But
yeah, he really feels like the character that they were trying to go for with Reese, where, like what we talked about, he's got some very abrasive sort of outward qualities about him.
He's very crude, but he's also really nice on the inside.
Yeah, I think the idea that they were going for with Reese, and that I think they eventually get to, but only just barely and after a long time, he's very abrasive, but he can ultimately be trusted to kind of have a heart and make decent decisions. And like what stops that with Reese is that we lean too hard into the abrasiveness, and like he straight up has anger issues.
He has a lot more information about Torchwood, though, as a profession than Reese did. So I think that can explain at least some of the abrasiveness and the difference between the two characters. Because Reese was just like, you're not telling me anything about your job, and you're coming home like covered in cuts and bruises, and said you almost died. Whereas he's like, I know, it's some kind of super secret government job the Anto's working at, and it's bad. That's still more than Reese had, especially in Series 1.
Also, of course, Reese has to get upset about finding out Jack found out before him.
Oh my God.
To be fair, can you imagine if Reese found out when, confessed she cheated on him and then erased his memory?
I'm still waiting for that to drop, dude. I'm waiting for Big Finish audio, like the last one of Torchwood. And it just ends with them divorced.
I trying to forget that ever happened, because it was just a horrible thing.
It was with Owen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. She destroyed the evidence.
To be fair, Gwen calls him Reese the Rant for a reason.
Peter Capaldi is still great, everybody. That's what I want us to leave this on. Such a great actor.
Overall thoughts, the fourth one, this one was pretty good. I actually started getting into it by this point. It only took over half the show, but
It's part of what we were talking about, right? Where this is a miniseries. And unlike any other sort of season of TV, it's kind of a mistake to take these as episodes as opposed to parts of a really long movie.
Yeah, but I've watched shows where it's like a big long movie, and I gotten into it after 1 or 2 episodes. I don't know. I think it's just because I'm not a big Torchwood fan.
Yeah,
there's a lot of build up here too. There's the first 3 episodes are just setting up so much crap, and then we finally get to actual plot stuff in these 2. And I think it's a lot of just payoff for the last 2 hours of this.
I won't go that far. I actually think this is really perfectly paced. I just think each episode introduced something new to the story that has basically been started off or teased in the first episode, and I think it all comes together really well. So I don't know whether I'm in the minority of that opinion here.
I'm with you, Rob. So it seems like an even split split between the four of us. Episode 4 is also the one where we learned that Jack is like fully responsible for all of this happening. How do we feel about in the flashback? You need someone who can't die to like make this deal, and they're like, no, we need someone who doesn't care. It's like even in the moment, Jack very obviously does care. Like you probably went to the wrong person.
I sort of took it as Jack is desensitized to all of this stuff, probably done lots worse. And they maybe have some of the stuff he's done before on record. That's why they chose him, because he's so desensitized to all of this, having to do this stuff. I mean, you never know. He's worked at Torchwood for, like, what, 200 years?
Ugh, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's seen everything there is to see at this point, and like even though he probably still cares, he just has more of an attitude like I can still get the job done, desensitized to everything.
Parallel with the Doctor's character, you know, they've both been around a long time. I've had to do lots of bad stuff to solve situations, and I don't know if it's intended as a deliberate parallel.
It definitely could be. I'm much more cynical in my interpretation of it because I know that this show is essentially created as British Angel. I think part of me when I was watching that, this was supposed to be kind of a Hyperion, all of them moment for Jack, and it just didn't come across the way that they were directing the scene. I think the way that it was originally envisioned, because like I don't really get the idea that Jack actually doesn't give a as you guys have been saying. So I think that the intent behind the scene didn't necessarily match the execution. That was the thing that was going through my head the entire time I was there, was like they wanted to make his actions morally questionable. But if you look at it from the perspective of 12 kids versus the entire planet or all of the children, then there's like really no math there.
Yeah, but I understand what they're trying to do. It's the same as the fires of Pompeii. The whole moral dilemma is like, do you let this city burn or the whole planet get destroyed? Kill the moon with the moon versus the planet. It's, you know, they do that a lot with Doctor Who, I think.
What's it called? Like the train track dilemma or something like that?
Trolley problem, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
not
the
even
trolley
going to
problem.
get into that discussion, because last time I got into that discussion, it led to a 10-minute argument. So
You were just sitting there like we're just gonna let everybody die.
I told you we are going to turn this into a philosophy podcast
Correct
at some
solution.
point.
You guys talking about it this way makes me think about it differently.
Good.
Jack suffered at that moment from the same thing that pretty much everyone else in this series does, which is that they think they only have two options, and both of them involve like basically acquiescing to the 456. If Jack or anyone had at the beginning just said, no, screw you, you're not getting any kids and we're gonna find a way to kill you or like beat you or drive you off somehow, I'm sure they could have done it, and that's ultimately what they end up having to do now. Like everyone in the system is like so willing to actually give up kids because they see no other option, and that's just them being kind of defeatist.
I think they would probably try some other options before they went from, just giving all the kids up, to be honest, if this was like a real life thing.
they do that in the episode itself when the 456 they ask for 10% of the kids. There's a whole scene discussing several different options. I mean, the options boil down to, shall we sacrifice these kids or these kids from that area? But least amount of damage sort of discussion.
What I mean is, this seems a bit quick. Like, I think they would at least look at some kind of other options. Like, is there some kind of way to kill these things? Or can we kill the thing in the glass or something?
Yeah, I think
you
it
couldn't just,
boils
like,
down
blow it
to
up?
like a ratings issue too, because like when you have a show like Doctor Who, you don't want to show a ton of like inescapable situations. It's kind of instructive in that way. Like you want to show people that they can find a way out of a bad choice, whereas like this one's trying to go for like a more morally gray situation. I don't know if this is the perfect allegory, but Zack Snyder always seems to think that making one of his properties more mature than its regular version is by like giving the characters an impossible choice, and they have to pick one of the two options, and both options are crap, and they can't come up with a third
These
way.
don't make movies, they make films.
But I just want to say, in regards to that, this whole series has a lot of that. A lot of just, okay, everything sucks and there's nothing you can do about it, or both choices are just terrible, or any choice you make is going to be terrible. A lot of downer. It's okay sometimes, but I feel like they do a little too much in the series because it just feels like a bit uncreative. Like, okay, everything sucks and there's nothing you can do about it.
It's gotta be dark.
I take it as you really want to commit to being realistic in the sense that we're looking at this government and like what would bureaucrats do to sort of save their own skins and come out of this looking as clean as possible.
I
And-
like that part because it's pretty realistic, but I'm just talking about as a series overall, that's kind of seems like the overarching theme.
I just think part of that is this weird sort of thing where this show has a problem that a lot of spin-offs have, where it tries to kind of have its cake and eat it too, because in order to do all that stuff, we kind of have to accept that there's no readily available means to just blow these guys up. And part of that is Torchwood used to be a much more expansive, more offensively capable like project, and now it's not because the Doctor put a stop to that. And Unit, we just kind of have to acknowledge it, but not be like, hey, why doesn't Unit just blow these guys up? Part of that is just that's something that we just kind of have to accept to tell the story. But also, it never occurred to me until this viewing just how kind of novel it is that they straight up just say they're using the kids as drugs. And the reason I think that is because that's kind of like the premise of this show, which is like procedural, mature Doctor Who taken to its extreme. Where it's like the premise of this whole miniseries could be an episode of NCIS, except instead of an individual, the victim is an entire planet. Where it's like, this is just like a druggie going through withdrawals, taking a gun and pointing it at like someone to stick them up for drug money. That's this entire series, except it's with a whole planet instead of one person.
Well, I want to know if the 456 specifically is like druggy within the confines of his own like species, or if all of them are like this and they're all just going to different planets.
My favorite thing is that it's an alien who feeds off children on a show produced by the BBC.
That was a very dark joke.
But yeah, no, that was something that Brianna also pointed out, which is like, that really goes a long way to explaining their behavior and just how erratic they are. They are like someone going through symptoms of withdrawal. They're like a drug addict who's just like fiending for their next hit. And that's why they can barely hold a conversation without like getting really aggressive and erratic.
Yeah, also it's kind of messed up that humans are so lame we can't take out one drug addict from another planet.
And hey, they went up in a column of fire at the end. It seems like they're susceptible to fire. Just burn all of them.
If you have to sacrifice someone to do it, though. The point I'm getting at, our technology, and we're so little and tiny compared to the rest of the universe.
That's something that kind of always bothered me because, like, they did start reverse engineering some alien tech later on in the series. You'd think after the amount of times they've been invaded at this point, they'd, like, devise some sort of countermeasures. It's like the Avengers problem. Like, you introduce the Chitauri and then it's suddenly, oh, now we have to get, like, laser weapons to even stand a chance on the galactic stage. It's pretty much the same thing here. And it's just like they didn't really try to update their military capabilities at all. They were just Torchwood, figure it out.
Well, think about it. In the Doctor Who universe, every single alien invasion in this show in Doctor Who got dismissed as a hoax. I think Russell T Davies, considering the current events of this year, was actually very on the money with that. Like, we literally see multiple alien invasions like hoax, and yeah, we predicted the future.
I think at the very beginning of the 10th Doctor's era, they had a weapon that killed the aliens at the end. And it was like alien technology. Yeah, I remember the Doctor, scolding everyone about it and stuff like that. And that's basically as far as they kind of go with it. After season 2, they don't really develop anything else.
Seems like such a bad idea, just from like a defensive standpoint. Like, so many more people are going to die if you don't at least create something to stop offensive technology from other races. Like, it's just going to be constant lasers from satellites onto your countries, and you're not going to be able to do anything to stop it. And the Doctor be like, pacifism.
Well, see, that's the thing, is that, like, the Doctor's problem isn't that they had it, it's that they used it when they were, like, turning and running. If you abuse it, then I reserve rights to confiscate it, basically.
I don't really feel like I was abusing it. We've been over this before, but it was like, yeah, they threatened to kill half the world, so I think there should be a little punishment there.
I think there's a long philosophical debate we could have about this.
About the lady who's making the suggestion of, like, let's round up the poorest kids, the least educated kids, and the ones who aren't going to contribute to society. Basically making an argument that's tantamount to eugenics. Let's decide based on circumstances beyond these kids' control that they are less worthy of life than some other kids.
That's not even tantamount to eugenics. That just is eugenics. They're like, let's kill off the bads and the poors.
I do have to wonder if they would actually like kill off all the uneducated people, and who would vote for Trump.
Exactly. Or
Well,
Boris.
Brianna made a great point, which is that kids who aren't in the system really lucked out. Like, there are some kids who are maybe so underprivileged that they got lucky because they're not on record.
They didn't get signed up for the alien drug draft.
There's just something to that lady in that scene where it's like, you can tell this isn't just the desperation of the situation talking. Like, this is something that this lady believes in just in her day-to-day life, that being educated a certain way, coming from a certain background, having a certain job makes you more worthy of life than other people.
Standard conservative talking points.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that we're still, all these years later, living in a world where people like that, who think like that, are populating the highest positions of power. Like, it's not even this show being bleak, it is really just reflecting reality on us.
Yeah, and like unfortunately, those kind of power structures are so slow to change because they're populated by the oldest and the most conservative people, that they find the oldest, most conservative people of the next generation and bring them in. So it's just this incremental change. You see it in US politics, you see it obviously in UK politics here.
Obviously, capitalism will keep the ones who we believe will contribute to the workforce.
Yeah, I've always found it kind of interesting how they blend kind of social Darwinism and eugenics into capitalism when it comes to like conservative stuff, because they do believe that unless you can contribute to specifically the workforce, you don't deserve to live. And like that's predominantly seen in the States. Whatever you can contribute to society is what you're worth. And it's not even true for the highest echelons.
And it didn't even occur to me to like tie it into what I was going to talk about later. That's Frobisher's entire arc. He's just this guy who is a cog in this machine. We end with when he kills himself and his family, that lady who worked with him, like his secretary, is giving the speech to Lois about how he, like, don't forget that he was really a good man, and she puts a lot of emphasis on how hard he worked. Like, that's not valued enough in today's society, hard work. And it's this weird thing where, like, she doesn't understand, like, the degree to which he was so focused on work kind of started to override his goodness. Like, I'm sure John Frobisher is or was a good person, but he got so caught up in working for the system, putting his faith in this corporatized system, just work, work, work. Everything that he's doing across all 5 of these episodes is in the sake of work and in the sake of getting a job done, that kind of supplanted his morality. One trait that he has that she most admires is the thing that was stopping him from really making the good, right choices this whole time. And, like, it's so unfortunate. Like, his whole being, his life, the life of his children and his wife get sacrificed to this machine where they're like, we need to be seen as losing. We're going to take your kids and actually kill them because, well, it's what the job requires of you. And it sucks. Like, we just watched this guy just get eaten alive literally by his work.
It's kind of screwed up that in the country that values work so much, the people that do the least amount get paid the most and value the most.
The people who do the most work have to kill themselves and their families.
Yes, and they're considered unworthy.
That is the thing, because like there is a fundamental hypocrisy in how the system works, and this is kind of like just a general like discussion of capitalism. When you get to a certain point where you have a certain amount of wealth and power, you don't really need to do anything to maintain it because it maintains itself. So you're able to kind of impress that power upon those that are underneath you. So in theory, you're supposed to grant them a certain amount of power, but there's no one overseeing you. So you can just do whatever you want and no one can stop you. So that's why these people are setting up Frobisher as the fall guy from the very beginning.
There is also what I think you could see as a nice parallel, or maybe not even parallel, but just sort of tie between Frobisher and Jack, which is, this is the bit where, and this is something that Brianna honed in on, where Jack and Ianto have that conversation of like, Ianto's still just really trying to be there for Jack and connect with him and be like, you have to tell me these things. I'm trying to have something with you, but you're kind of shutting me out. And Jack is like, oh, by the way, I have a daughter named Alice and a grandson named Stephen, and Frobisher kidnapped them yesterday. So now you know that. Brianna made a really good point, which is that's the only reply Jack really could have given that would have stopped Yanto dead. Jack is thinking, you want to be cute? You want to be boyfriends? Well, here's what happens when people get close to me, and you don't seem to fully comprehend that yet. And that's getting to when Yanto eventually dies. It really sucks because he says, I love you. And Jack is just like, don't. Like, even in Yanto's last moments, Jack can't bring himself to open up to him on that level. And so, like, he dies never getting that I love you back. And Frobisher, when he's talking to his wife in an earlier scene, where he's like, I love you, nothing's wrong, I'm just doing regular work stuff, I love you. And she just bursts into tears. And, like, we were wondering for a second, like, why does she have that strong a reaction? That's probably the first time she's heard that from him in years. And she's like so stunned by it that she doesn't even get the chance to say it back until after he hangs up. Jack like is a very different form of work, but it's also a same thing with Jack where like his job just completely overtakes his life and he can't have that connection to the point where he can't even say that he loves somebody.
I have a bit of a question about that because I've seen kind of this whole you're immortal, everybody you love will die, can't form connections. I've never seen anything to the opposite of that. And I'm just wondering, like, why? Because Jack clearly made connections with people before he met the current team. He had a kid, all that kind of stuff. And it just kind of seems like this stale writing idea where people get, like, cut off from humanity by living long enough. What would happen if he had gone in the other direction?
It's kind of similar, really, to The Woman Who Lived. They sort of touch upon how Ashilda has lived so long that she can't even remember many of the people she made connections with. I think it's probably the same with Jack.
I'm not 100% sure about that just because Jack's not human and like immortality aside, we don't know what his biological capacities are and he doesn't do what Ashilda does because in that episode she straight up has shelves upon shelves of self-written diaries so that she can look back and be like, okay, this is a thing that happened to me. Jack seems to have what the Doctor has, which is that no matter how long they live, they seem to be able to recall details fairly well. And like across series 1 and 2, we've had instances where like people who Jack met decades ago or maybe even a century ago would like pop up and he'd be able to like rattle off info about that off the top of his head. Jack, I don't think struggles with memory and like remembering his connections. I think he's just kind of also has what the Doctor has, which is he's just so tired of it. He can keep trying to connect with people, but they will eventually die. Even if it's not in like a sad way, even if it's not in a tragic way, anyone who Jack loves, he will lose eventually.
You would think if he lived long enough and thought about it long enough, he might come to the conclusion that it's still like worth it to form these connections with people, even though they do eventually end, because he's been through so many of them. But I never see that happen, A, with Jack or the Doctor, or B, with like any other immortal character in fiction. It's always the, oh no, everyone I love is going to die, buddy.
That's necessarily true, because we see it happen all the time with the Doctor, where the Doctor's had like repeated phases of like, I don't need any friends. And then they eventually decide, you know what, no, having friends is pretty cool. I think that's a thing that we don't talk about explicitly as much in writing just because it's part of the human condition. We don't even need it explained to us when they connect with other people. They just can't help it. We as social creatures like have this desire to not be alone constantly, and I think Jack has that. Even at the end of this miniseries when he's like, I can't be on Earth anymore. Too much bad stuff has happened here. Too much of it has been my fault. I've got to get out of here. He's still going somewhere where there are other people. Like, Jack's not going to hide himself off alone somewhere to be alone forever, like the Doctor might try to do and just pass through places.
Or live in a cloud.
You see him, he's living among the Adipose, the Slitheen, the guy from Voyage of the Damned, and the Half.
God,
Yeah,
that sounds horrible.
The Doctor Who version of Big Brother.
Don't ever forget about me, Jack. It's like I will never cut to the bar. Yanto too. So what's your
To be
name?
fair, we never see him in Miracle Day, so they probably just like, you know, had a fling and then whatever.
It's a rebound lay.
He probably just banged one out to forget about Yanto.
We'll talk about Miracle Day in a minute because, like, briefly discuss Lucy and I, our hot take. I don't know if it's still a hot take, but get to it. Just sticking with that scene, it is kind of, in fairness, real stupid that Jack and Yanto go in there without a real plan. They're just like, let us take over. To 456, we're not giving you any children. Like, we'll go to war with you. And like I do like that bit where it's like if a child dies on Earth like every 3 seconds, and the human response is to accept and adapt. It's like, that's an interesting way to look at it. People die all the time, constantly. Like there's not a moment that goes by on this planet where someone isn't dying. Why do we feel this like instinctual need to stop it from happening by a particular cause?
Well, you actually kind of create an interesting conundrum. What if they had taken a bunch of like dying children and given them the 456? Because the 456 does, in its own way, prolong their lives, even if it is not the best way of doing it. If you guys remember how they looked, creepy albino Bane children with the masks on.
The problem is with that is you can't introduce that because then you're basically introducing an easy solution. It's the same with the whole let's blow them up thing. It's like we can just try and ignore that so the audience won't lose any suspense.
I think there's a moral question that follows that, like whether or not it is moral to send dying children to be drugs for this weird alien Hydra thing.
I think what you're touching on something, which is that it absolutely is immoral because I'd say a fate worse than death. And the 456 are basically doing what the British government again is doing. They look like used up products because they keep them alive forever technically, but that's not life. They don't get to be human beings anymore. They don't get to live. They get to be a resource. Hide themselves as they make all these decisions. The government keeps having to correct themselves when they say children. They're like 4 million children, 4 million units. They have to call them like objects because they understand that what they're doing is commodifying human beings, and that's inherently immoral and wrong and gross.
Again, Russell T Davies sees the future because that was actually our current government's attitude to care homes.
I was going to say at the next episode when it's like, we urge all of you to send your children back to school. Major COVID vibes.
We asked you to sacrifice your grandparents for the economy. Now we're asking you to sacrifice your children.
I was thinking about that while I was watching it. It's like, oh, send all your kids to school. It's perfectly safe. I'm like, right.
And that one bit where publishers are like, what's so special about us? Why shouldn't we go to school? And Brianna's like, that is not how a child would respond. You'd be like, yay, no school.
It was definitely a scene written by an adult. And they're really young, too. Like, they're only like 8 and 12 or something like that.
I think for me, the two most striking moments in the episode were obviously the reveal of the child and Yanto's death. When Nick was talking about kind of how they reveal him to just be a drug addict, it almost kind of trivializes all of the suffering and death that we've seen up until that point, which kind of makes it worse in my viewing experience. Like, he's doing all of this over something that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Like, he just wants to get high, and we've already sacrificed 12 kids to this thing, and he wants to take like several 100 million more. Where is he going to store these things, first of all? But the reveal of what they're doing just to manufacture drugs essentially is like horrifying.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a drug dealer now. Like, I think the first ones were just for him, and then now this is all speculations. But I think he's going to be a drug dealer because, like, if this works for me, it'll work for everybody.
Sell them by like grams. 1 gram of child.
Cut off like a piece of one kid and give it to you. How does that sound?
I sold him a bag of oregano and told him it was children.
But there is a line to reference that. There's like, they go, you opened the market up all those years ago, so maybe.
It is very interesting to kind of think about this in terms of like intergalactic society, because we don't really get a lot. So I think it'd be really cool if we ever saw the 456's planet again, or ever, I guess. In this case, we haven't seen it the first time, but his species again, just so we can kind of figure out how he fits into it. But I guess it also kind of works as this mysterious bad guy at the same time. We were talking about that with like the Lovecraftian eldritch horror and like not knowing, kind of making it scarier last time.
I am not going to get into the specifics of this argument because it was very lengthy and very heated. But Brianna and I had a very long discussion about Reese and whether his response to Gwen in the car is like objectionable or not, when she's implying that she's like gonna abort the baby, and his first response is like, you're not getting rid of it, and she's like, is that right? And part of that is like Gwen's fear of like, you want to raise a child in a world like this, that that could be taken one of two ways. That could be taken in the broad sense of like we've seen how depraved human beings can be under pressure. Do you want to bring a child into that world? But also, like, do you want to bring a child into a world where the 456 could come back in 10 or 12 years and ask for our kid? Like, that's a possibility. The worst case scenario is that, like, if the 456 ever were to come back like a third time, it would probably be like hundreds of years from now. Millions would probably last them centuries if they didn't just OD and die out in space.
Not my problem sort of situation where it's like you do this because it's the right thing to do and somebody's kid is going to have to pay? Or do you just say, well, if they're not going to be taking my child, then it's fine by me?
The Prime Minister, I think, characterized like that in that he's trying to stay out of the situation as much as possible, at least in the early
He doesn't want to
episodes.
create a panic, you know? He wants to downplay it, so he doesn't create a panic.
No politician would ever do that, sure.
No, that'd be horrible, especially in the face of some kind of deadly thing.
Do you guys have any particular reactions to that discussion in the car and like the whole, just the idea that Gwen might decide to get rid of the baby?
I think it's a reasonable thing that goes through your head. I mean, I've heard people talk about before, not pregnant, but just like, you want to have kids and stuff. And I'm like, I'm not sure I really want them because the world's such a mess and you're bringing them into chaotic hell at this point. I do understand where she's coming from. I have more of a problem. Reese is a bit more like telling her what to do. She still has to give birth to it. So,
if you've ever seen the film First Reformed with Ethan Hawke, basically there's this sort of climate activist who tried to convince his wife to have an abortion because he doesn't want to bring his kid up in a world where we're heading towards climate disaster. That theme has been tackled in like a bunch of other things, and it's an interesting thing. Like, why would you want to bring your kid up in a world where the life is going to be worse? So I definitely really found that discussion very interesting.
Showed two different perspectives on it, and like Reese's is kind of objectionable for a number of reasons, but at the same time, you kind of need to show how many different schools of thought there are in the subject. So like I'm personally kind of firmly in Gwen's camp where she should kind of get the ultimate decision on what happens with her body. At the same time, I understand Reese kind of being like, think this over. There is a lot of bad in any version of the world, and you can always make the argument that you don't want to bring your kid up in a world that is bad.
The last discussion between 12 and Clara, where it's like, I was supposed to keep you safe. Why? No one's ever safe. Like, life is not a safe thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can't even appreciate the good in life without having something to contrast it against. So it makes no sense to me as an argument that you don't want to bring a child up in a world where something bad might happen to it, because something bad is always going to happen to your child. That's just how the world works.
But I think it's becoming more and more of a thing recently because things just feel like they're getting worse and worse. And I do understand, like, we're at the point where climate change is at the point where it's starting to affect us. So I can understand somebody be like, you know what? I'm not sure about having kids right now because it's not looking good.
See, people keep saying that the world is getting worse, but like I kind of just think that our ability to understand how bad the world already is just getting better. People tend to notice things globally when they hit a certain age, and there tends to be kind of like a straight line in terms of the world actually getting better or worse. Like if you grew up in the 1300s, you had to deal with a Black Death that wiped out a third of Europe. Like, COVID is nothing compared to that. And they didn't say, oh, man, worst year ever. Like, can we have a redo?
1962, mankind was on the brink of global annihilation for 13 days. So
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
The Cuban Missile Crisis, and we had volcanic eruption that created a year-long winter in the 1800s. Like, I think that we have had bad events of all kinds, long-term and short-term, happening constantly. And we were talking earlier about defeatism. I think that is a manifestation of defeatism, because I've seen people say, oh, every year since like 2013 has just been getting progressively worse. And so I think it's just a global kind of awareness of how global politics has always been and global society has always been over the past couple of years.
I don't want to get too far away from the scene because, well, this is an interesting discussion. Because, like, my thing is, in a broader, like, objective sense, I agree with where Lucy and Brianna came from, which is just, like, and also Brian to a degree, where it really is Gwen's choice. Like, on one level, they are married. Once you marry someone, you're agreeing to a kind of, like, level of partnership that does entail like at least some leeway in these kind of decisions. But ultimately, Gwen is the one who's going to be giving birth. Like, it's primarily her choice. But also, just, this is such a quick exchange, and I don't think Reese's response has anything to do with, like, his beliefs on that level, so much as it is just the context of the situation. Because for him, not even like 24 hours ago, they were both incredibly excited for this. Like, she just brings it up and he's immediately, like, his response, it's not like he's telling her what to do. He's just having like a knee-jerk verbal reaction.
There is an emotional context, yeah. Like, I completely understand what you're saying, Nick, and I agree. Like, he definitely is reacting in the moment to all of the difficult crap that they've been dealing with in that day. And
like,
he's just kind of expelling it at once.
And when Gwen shuts him down, he does stop. So I feel like if that had been a lengthier conversation, like, Reese would have eventually come to Gwen's point of view anyway. But they've both got like a ton of things to do, and they do not have time to talk about it.
Problem is, even if it is a knee-jerk reaction, it's still a bit like telling her what to do, even if that's not what he's thinking about. It's like, you're not getting rid of it. Like, it's her body. At the end of the day, anything that has to do with her body is her choice. So you don't really get to say in that.
His line delivery also read to me a bit like a question.
I kind of saw that too. Like, the way he was saying it, he was more incredulous than anything. Like, he obviously didn't want her to have an abortion because he wanted to have kids with her.
And he knows that she, like a second ago, wanted to have a kid.
Like you're saying, he doesn't want her to make like an immediate decision based on emotional factors that could pass before her pregnancy comes to term.
Yeah, I feel like she's mostly just venting in the car anyways.
We pay that off in the scene where they're all in the shed, and it's like Gwen has given her speech that opens the first episode, the fifth episode, which I'll talk about in a minute. He's like, you weren't really being serious, right, about getting rid of it. And like, he's close to tears, and she's like, no, I wouldn't do that. I would never do that to you.
To other story plot lines in this series, I don't think it was as developed exactly. It was just like,
We didn't really have that conversation in like a non-clumsy manner at that point in media, I don't think. So that was like the best they could have done at the time.
And just, there's too much other stuff going on.
Like, I said this in my like comment section, whatever, because Reese brings it up, like, are you not getting rid of it or whatever? And I'm like, there's a lot of things going on, Reese. I get that we need to have this conversation and stuff, but
Maybe wait until after the apocalypse is over.
Reese is the type of guy to start asking what you're having for tea when down or something.
I know I'm always the guy who's giving Reese the benefit of the doubt, but I don't think that's what this is. They're sheltering like children from armed guards who are ready to like beat up at least and at most shoot people to get kids. Like, this might genuinely be the last chance they ever get to have that conversation.
But if that's true, then she'll be dead anyway. It won't matter.
And it's good that they're on the same page.
I don't know. I just feel like it was a bit inappropriate to bring that up right now.
It does make sense that he wants like emotional resolution just in case one of or both of them dies. But also at the same time, it is like in the midst of an apocalypse and there are more important things going on. So I can kind of see both sides of it. It's like, yes, it makes sense for him to do this, but also, dude, like, we get it, but still don't do it right now. Like, there's a crazy drug addict, monster man.
Also, anybody thought it was kind of weird. I mean, I know she doesn't have anywhere else to do this, but I was just thinking, what were the kids thinking when she made that video about we're all doomed?
That's the same principle, right? Which is like, that's maybe not the most appropriate time to do that, but it might be the last chance that she ever gets.
I know, but that's more important than what's going on with them.
It's the production and the like staging of it all that makes it so that it's even in the last episode, 456 pretty much just does it as an intimidation tactic. When the kids start like speaking out the numbers, it's still super creepy. Like, that never stops being scary.
Children are always uncanny, dude. And if you get them saying stuff in creepy monotone voices, it's just you're printing money in terms of horror.
You think about all of the horror movies that have had like children as the monsters. It's like really common.
The Omen, Chucky, kind of.
It's sort of this like personification of innocence, which doesn't seem to be true. What people think of as innocence being turned into, you know, demonic things. So
Satan babies.
Before we get
Rosemary's Baby is literally that movie, The Omen.
Exactly.
But before we get too far away from it, the speech itself, it's such an effective first scene for the episode to be like, no music, just shots of the kids being taken and it's like sometimes I think the Doctor must look at this planet and turn away in shame. That really says it all. That's purely conjecture from Gwen, but I could also absolutely believe it. Like, I could picture pretty much any of the Doctors looking at humanity's response to the 456 and being like, oh, why do I like these guys again?
They did the internment camp stuff again.
They do it in Miracle Day. Cecil
It's
Davis
at
is
the drop of a
obsessed
hat.
with that.
Yeah, at the drop of a hat, the British government is just like, all right, let's round up all the minorities again. Can't stop
No,
themselves.
he does it all the time. It's like his main recurring trope, like internment camps. Yes.
Yep.
I do feel like that's a bit projecting, though. The Doctor knows all this stuff already. They still have this, oh, humanity is still good in the side, temporarily disgusted or something like that, but to give up on all humanity.
Let's take the whole fixed points in time thing out of it, because that's our convenient go-to excuse for not messing with particular points in history. If the Doctor looked at the Holocaust and said, you know what, no, I can't solve humanity's problems for them like this, because this is just human beings being terrible. They haven't earned my help this time. Like that, I completely believe that, and it's just really an interesting thing to bring up here.
The quote in The Doctor's Wife, the TARDIS says, I always took you where you needed to go. Unless it's a fixed point in time issue. It seems like every terrible event that happened in human history is a fixed point in time, so...
Them both speaking very broadly. Like, the TARDIS doesn't literally mean that all the time I'm going to take you exactly where you need to be. They're just kind of speaking in general.
Yeah, I took that more of just being a metaphor or something.
Well, like, compare that to the end of season 7 where they deliberately try to go to Trenzalore and it's just like, no, we're not going to go. Like, I'm going to do everything I can to not go here. And it's like, I thought you always took him where he needed to go. Which one is it? Like,
I think that was a reference more to there was a recurring trope in Doctor Who where they were trying to go to somewhere else, but somehow they'd end up like in this place. Like, for example, the beginning of The Hungry Earth, where he's trying to take Amy and Rory to Rio. Suddenly they're in like 2020 Wales, mysteriously with no COVID pandemic.
As far as we know, Rob, it could just be anti-maskers.
Well, if I remember correctly, future Amy and Rory were socially distancing from them, so...
That was the real reason why they were so far away all the time.
Yeah.
There's that scene where they're all locked inside a church in one area, and it's like, wow, okay, these people don't know.
They're all anti-mask.
When we talk about that episode eventually, I'm going to have a new perspective on it now.
2020 could have been the year when humans and lizard people decided to share the planet. Instead, it was the year where we destroyed everything.
The lizard people are already leading the planet. To kind of go back to the episode, I kind of want to talk about Frobisher again, because he's my favorite character in the whole thing.
I had another point about him, too, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to let you talk first then, Nick, because you have notes and I don't.
Specifically, like Brianna pointed out with the work thing, like it kind of sucks that the Prime Minister, he feels like he could be Frobisher in a few years. It's that weird paradox of, like, Frobisher's supposedly a good person, but one of his... like more respectable traits, how much of a hard worker he is. If Frobisher just kept at it and like kept working in the system, best case scenario is he'd probably end up just like this guy.
Yeah, if you were in his position, would you act any differently? That's what I think. That's what I find very thought-provoking when it comes to the Brian May
A man
character.
who is much smarter than all of us, Ian Martin, was talking about this actually. Briefly discussed season 5 of Angel. Does corporate employment change you or can you change it? And I feel like in many ways this is an example of corporate employment, even if it's more government-oriented. It's a very soul-sucking kind of position that he's in. And it kind of doesn't matter whether or not he's a good person because the job dictates that he has to be a bad one. Him going along with that, being complicit in it, makes him a bad person.
Yeah, and like his arc across this miniseries is what you imagine his entire life, like his whole career has been, and guys just like him, where it's like you come in all wide-eyed and wanting to do good, but just like, well, the system is corrupt, so if you just make this one concession, then you can stay in. And if you make this other concession, and if you just keep making concessions for weeks and months and years and decades, then you'll be able to stay in the circle.
There's a great phrase to describe what you're talking about. It's the unjust man says, meet me in the middle. You step forward and he steps back. And then he says, meet me in the middle again. So you just keep moving.
What I like about the characterizations of May and Frobisher in this, it's very easy for Russell T Davies, like he did in sort of Aliens of London, for example, to say like, all politicians are evil and this sort of a one-dimensional caricature, right? What I like about this series is that it sort of presents these politicians as ordinary people who are forced to basically make despicable choices because of the system they're in. And I think that's more sort of reflective of reality, with some exceptions. Like, for example, I brought up like Barack Obama, not to stray too off topic. He's probably an example of someone who probably like a good person, and he wanted to like change the system, but he couldn't. At least part of his legacy to be sort of really bad decisions that affected a large portion of the world. The portrayal of Frobisher and May here reflects reality. Like, the system is just so messed up that stuff like this can happen no matter who's in charge.
It is also partially just the Prime Minister being a massive douche.
Prime Minister actually has a lot of bad qualities. I think he's a very bad person, but in general, whereas Frobisher, I think, is sort of more of a person who's trapped in the system. I got the sense from May that he was just a cowardly sleazebag who only cared about his own reputation. I do like the kind of difference between those two characters, whereas Frobisher is someone with good intentions, he clearly has good qualities, but he's sort of trapped in a system that forces him to make horrible choices.
He's not trapped, though. That's the thing. He's not trapped. He chose at every turn to continue to be part of the system. He was presented with, hey...
It's the same as how some people decide to, like, keep their job in, worrying about what's going to happen next.
We're literally discussing child murder here.
It is child murder, but it's child murder in the face of possible extinction of the human race. It's sort of one of those, like the what you mentioned before with the train analogy. It's like that.
The Prime Minister really does choose to be malicious about it in a way that is not necessary. And again, thank Brianna for this point. The public needs to see us lose some children, and like a member of the government has to be seen to have lost. And Frobisher's like, oh, you mean they'll pretend to be inoculated? And he's like, no, really. No, wait a minute. Why can't they pretend? Why can't Frobisher put his kids on a bus and then pick them back up and then get relocated or something? Why do they actually have to die? Pretty much the only reason is because the Prime Minister decided to, for no reason, because he's a douche.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, though. Frobisher was aware of the Prime Minister's character from the very beginning, but he chose to continue to work for him. So I think there's an element of culpability for him. He could have taken his kids and just, run the away.
You know what the worst part is about this? Doctor is actually responsible for Brian May being in the position that he's in because he chose to get rid of Harriet Jones.
To that point, it's great that we bring up the Doctor explicitly in this last episode because, for better or worse, their shadow does kind of loom over the events of this whole miniseries.
Yeah, it sort of links back to Boomtown, with the whole discussion about how much destruction have you left in your wake. We don't know how Harriet Jones would have handled this, but we would maybe imagine she'd have shown more empathy than this guy. The Doctor has basically paved the way to eventually become Prime Minister because of how he got rid of her and changed history.
It could be worse. It could still be Harold Saxon.
The whole thing about Harriet Jones is she was supposed to be the head of Britain's golden age, which would have probably lasted about over a decade. And the Doctor gets rid of her for about 6 months. Yeah, the Doctor is kind of responsible for Harold Saxon succeeding her, and then Brian May succeeding.
Element of culpability, but I don't think he's wholly responsible. People voted for Brian May.
Yeah, but it was the type of sort of reckless, history-changing action, which he did in a moment of anger, and he just doesn't know what it's going to lead to.
Yeah, it seems like the Doctor caused a lot of other problems that the main show just never addressed. It's kind of always siding with him. And the minute they actually, like we talked about last week with the Mars episode, it seems like they're finally going to do it. And it's like, okay, let's move on. Right.
I like the bit where the kids are shouting out all the numbers, and then Johnny is like, what are those, lottery numbers? Johnny's great. Johnny's the best.
Also, that's a white trash response.
Okay, we need to discuss the conclusion.
Am I crazy, or are there two separate versions of this episode? Because I remember distinctly watching a version of Day 5 where they're like, we need a child, and Alice is staring at Jack. It's like, no, Dad, and he just nods, and she runs off and screams, Steven! Silent.
That's the version I watched.
Was there any background music for that? I watched it yesterday, and it's playing a very specific backing track over that scene. I think 2 versions of this episode exist where they just changed the backing track of one scene for no reason.
Or we're dealing with the Mandela.
I can't really remember, to be honest.
Last time I watched this episode prior to last week was 2013.
Wow.
So I do not remember any of the specifics about it, but I do remember there was no music in the version that I watched this time.
Right, because I remember finding that really impactful. Of the strings keep building and building as we zoom in on Jack and he just gives that little nod, and then the music cuts out completely and she runs out the door screaming like a mad woman. I remember finding that really haunting.
Lucy, you said that, I think on Facebook, you said that you thought the actress who played Jack's daughter was horrific. I actually agree. This might be a minor criticism. I otherwise love this. I don't think she was that good. I think she was very... one-dimensional. I didn't really buy any of the emotions that she had. I don't know if you two feel the same.
I think she was great in the scene that I'm talking about, but with that exception, she's pretty unremarkable. Something wrong with her face. She has resting smile face.
I think it was more product of bad direction and writing for her scenes specifically. She wasn't told really how to act given scenes because, like you guys were saying, in her final scene, or I guess her second to last scene, I thought she was really good. And that look that she gives Jack right after this scene where she's holding her dead kid in her arms, where she just kind of looks at him and then leaves and never comes back, that haunted me for a week after I watched it both times, because she just pulled it off, I think, so flawlessly. What possible interaction can they have after that?
Due to the thing that her character is sort of written very one-dimensionally. She's not really written with a big variety of emotions. That she's basically just angry with Jack all the time because he abandoned her. And then when she actually gets to the later scenes, it's she's mad at him again because he's killed her son. Basically her whole character is sort of just being mad at Jack for 5 episodes. So it might not be the actress's problem. It might be just that, as you said, the direction and writing of the character. She's not very interesting. And she
starts out with resentment at the beginning and then turns to outright hatred in episode 5, even though she was aware post-mortem why it needed to happen.
If Jack killed her son, actually completely understandable why she would never talk to him again. He didn't even discuss it. He just did it.
Do you think maybe she feels a degree of guilt over it because she's the one who told them to bring in Jack to fix the problem in the first place? We opened the episode with him and Lois locked up, and then she's talking to the agent lady, and she's like, "You're gonna want Jack Harkness. He's the only guy who can fix this problem for you." If she hadn't requested that Jack be brought in, then this wouldn't have happened. Granted, millions of children would have died, but her son probably would have been safe.
I don't think she thought that would ever happen.
There's no way she could have known. Jack didn't even know that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but you guys are trying to rationalize an emotional reaction. She could still feel the guilt, even if she doesn't necessarily have a logical through line for why it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I still stand by. I don't think it was a good performance. Even the last scene, I did get cut off a little bit on the show, so I did not get to see the scene where they're in the hallway and the Jack and her look at each other. I remember that scene, but I didn't get to see it. The whole scene where she's watching her child die, her face was a little wooden. She starts screaming, and then they cut from behind her, and then she's screaming again, and I'm like, maybe they did that because she couldn't move her face.
Well, it's not really in relation to the character. It's just the way she reacts to certain things is very unconvincing. Torchwood sometimes picks these very unconvincing actors. Doctor Who, at least the modern show, has a very good track record with picking good actors. I don't think Torchwood does. I mean, you look at Grey's actor, who was terrible.
Oh, yeah.
And you look at this woman who plays Jack's daughter, and you think they could have chosen better people here.
I think part of it, though, is the character is very emotionally reserved in all of the appearances that she's in. So even in a situation like watching her child die, I don't think she would be emoting quite the same way as an average person would be in that situation. I think she does quite a bit of emoting in that scene, but
the writing is kind of partially responsible in that they don't really give her much to do, but it's at the same time, I'm not very much convinced by it.
I think for the most part, I think Doctor Who picks good actors. You have some questionable, like child actors every once in a while, but for the most part,
That's most child actors.
The actors in The Forest of the Night, you only have to look at that.
You are not allowed to mention that episode on this podcast.
But like they do have some, like even there, they had some good actors, like in the Christmas specials and stuff like that, like Christmas Carol.
They always get big name actors for the Christmas specials, so you can guarantee good acting in them, even if episodes themselves aren't good, which is often the case.
To wrap my whole point up, I was just saying, but the Torchwood's a bit more hit and miss. Doctor Who, like I said, besides a few child actors, and I think maybe Ryan, it's all been pretty good.
I thought that bit where we like zoom out on Jack's face while we just hear her screaming in the background, I thought that was really effective. Like, I don't love her performance, but it never occurred to me to be bothered by it.
Understated nature of John Barrowman's like emotional performances. Like he works better in the scenes where he's not doing big and like emotional. And this was a very like quiet, reserved moment for him.
I said this, but I'm never really convinced by John Barrowman when he's like trying to act serious. I think he's
Don't leave me, please.
When he's trying to be serious, I think he's very one-dimensional and wooden. I'm not really convinced by him. Like in series 1, there's many examples, but I specifically remember Greek's Burying Gifts when Tosh's sort of love interest gets shot into space. I just find Jack's reaction to the whole thing. He's like, yes, I did this because that. And it's just like, you know, he doesn't seem very passionate about it. And it's the same when Yanto dies. He's like, yeah, he's all right, but it's basically the same. I just find Jack, when he gets angry or emotional, to be basically just the same character portrayal. Like John Barrowman doesn't know how to do emotion. Just playing Jack from like The Empty Child, for example, where he's got a lot more like wit and charm about him, as opposed to where he's acting dramatic. I never buy it personally when Jack is like really dramatic. I don't buy John Barrowman when he's a dramatic actor. He just does the same facial expressions, the same line delivery, and it's like very one-dimensional.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of his dramatic acting either. I wouldn't say he's one-dimensional. There's something off about it every time he tries to do it for me.
I don't think he's good at big emotions, which is why I think when he gets angry in particular, that can come off really stale and wooden. When he's got to do like the subtler stuff, like again with the end where he's like giving them the okay to kill his grandson and we're just staying on his face after the aftermath of all that. I think that stuff's great. Like, I think he can do dramatic. I just don't think that he can do like big, juicy, gushy, like drama.
The comparison you made in the chat about Sylvester McCoy is very accurate. For example, in the scene where he's like about to kill his grandson, you can see like the tears coming down from his eyes and the expression on his face is brilliant. In certain bigger moments, like for example, the ending of Greek's Burying Gifts, where he's justifying his reason killing Tosh's girlfriend or whatever, and in Cyberwoman, Cyberwoman, where he's like sort of yelling at Yanto throughout the entire episode, he's really bad in that. It's similar to Sylvester McCoy, like you said. Say in the Happiness Patrol, when he's confronting the sniper. I don't know if any of you have seen that scene, but the bit where he's confronting the sniper in the Happiness Patrol, which is a legendary moment in Doctor Who history, he's like fantastic in that. Yeah. And then you look at some scenes in some of his other stories where he's basically shouting and screaming like, "Ace, come back!" And it's like he's really cringeworthy and embarrassing in that. And that contributes to, I think, his negative image as the Doctor. Subtle scenes where he's sort of giving a sort of like slight speech, like the Curse of Fenric. He's basically trying to explain to Fenric how he used Ace and like how she's an emotional cripple and everything like that. He's brilliant in that scene, but scenes where he sort of like is running around screaming are horrific. I get the same feeling with John Barrowman, where he's good at the small things, but really bad at sort of, you know, overemphasizing, shouting, and, you know, all that sort of stuff, like more over the top stuff. I do think it shows a lack of adaptability and variation and everything like that. You know, he is good at the small stuff, which is...
It's weird, because I tend to consider those subtler moments to be, like, more difficult for an actor, because those are the ones where you have to sell genuine emotion, whereas, like, the big emotional projections, you can really easily it. So it's almost to me like their acting skills are inverted. Like they're really good at the hard stuff, but they kind of trip up over the what I would consider like easy like acting bits, like the bit where like Matt Smith in Stonehenge kind of yelling up the aliens. Like he doesn't really have to project a ton of real emotion in that scene.
I can understand the point of view that doing subtler emotion is more difficult. I think there's just as much difficulty in doing like really projected emotion. It's a different kind of difficulty, but like what comes to my mind is that when you see people in real life who are very shouty and very angry or like very openly like loudly sad, that can look kind of silly. Like projecting of emotion even just in a real life context can look kind of cringy and silly from the outside. So I think it takes a really good performer to be able to convey the feeling and convey the intensity and cut out kind of the cringy silliness of it that would just come with seeing a person acting that way around you in reality. I don't think it's so much that their skills are inverted. I think they just have one kind of thing that they can achieve really well and the other one not so much.
That makes sense.
It's sort of the same with Adam Sandler, actually. If you see him in like comedy movies, you'll probably think, oh, he's a bit rubbish. But when you see him in stuff like Uncut Gems or Punch Drunk Love, actually, he's an amazing actor.
And a lot of that is like loud, intense emotions, yeah.
Same thing with Jim Carrey, surprisingly
because
enough.
they take advantage largely, I think, of his sort of persona and sort of blend it into a more good story. You know, with actors like John Barrowman, it's like sometimes they choose to like highlight their strengths and sometimes their weaknesses are kind of like on full front for the audiences to see.
I have one last thing that I want to say, which I think Lucy agrees with me on. And this is something that Brianna disagreed with me on, and I'm interested to when we talk about Miracle Day because she seems to like be a lot more favorable toward Miracle Day than a lot of people are. And my feeling at the end of this episode is that we should not have had Miracle Day. That Torchwood should have ended here with the ending of Children of Earth.
Well, the reason why I said that was because I felt like this was a good place for the story. I actually remember liking Miracle Day more than most people as well, but still felt like this was the logical point for the story to end.
Yeah, like I don't dislike Miracle Day, but like, and granted, part of this is Miracle Day is done by Stars. They move production. A lot of the cast is different, but the ending of Children of Earth Day 5 feels like the end of the story that we started in Series 1, Episode 1, bringing in Gwen, and like the fact that we have Jack be like, it was all my fault, Steven and Susie and Yanto and Owen and Tosh, like all of it, I've got to get out of here.
And the
like,
smoldering corpse of Grey.
We start this show with Jack has a team and he murders one of them. And then across 3 series, we just slowly keep losing people. And like bad stuff just keeps happening and Jack keeps having to make all the choices. And Gwen, meanwhile, comes in as the newcomer. She basically is the heart of the team. And even here at the end, she's the one who's like, you can't give up. You can't just quit. And if Torchwood was going to, like, the organization was going to survive in any sense, it would be with Gwen. But, like, there's nothing for her to build from now. It's just her.
And she's off to have a family.
Yeah, and like it's this really tragic ending, but it feels right. It feels like this is a natural end point for where we began this show in Series 1. And Miracle Day doesn't feel like that. Miracle Day doesn't even feel like an epilogue to this show. It feels almost like a completely different series, but with Jack and Gwen and Reese still there, just by happenstance. The way I would put it is that Series 1, Series 2, and Children of Earth all feel of a piece with each other, and Miracle Day does not feel like it's part of that piece.
I think you can look at Children of Earth as an ending. It doesn't necessarily have to be the ending. Keep bringing this back to Angel, because of course I am. Not Fade Away is an ending for the series if you want to look at it like that. But if you go into the comics, there's like the LA going into hell, all the stuff with Angel and Faith. Like there are natural endpoints at various points in people's lives. So you could have the story as we know it end there.
Buffy's a good example of that. You could literally end it after the 5th season if you don't like the last 2.
Well, you
or
know
Chosen. There's comics for that too.
You know what that makes me think of? But I've been listening to the Galactic Yo-Yo podcast. One of the guests that they had on there had this really interesting take, which is that Doctor Who should have ended when Ian and Barbara left. Because up until that point, Doctor Who is the story of these two teachers, their student and her grandfather. The degree to which the Doctor grows and changes as a character is largely dependent on the influence of Ian and Barbara. And when they leave, you could
The
argue...
show was ruined forever.
No, you could argue that the arc of the show's overarching story has reached a conclusion. And that's what I feel like here has happened. Like, Torchwood is the story of Jack and Gwen. And this is kind of an appropriate ending to where that story started.
I think it is an ending to that story. I would say that Miracle Day is very different in terms of the narrative through line, especially with how it ends. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I think it's very much more focusing on Jack.
I probably wouldn't have this problem if we didn't bring Gwen and Reese into Miracle Day at all.
That's fair.
I think you could just stop here if you wanted to. You can have more of a show and go on and just have a place for yourself to stop. I do that with shows.
Like Supernatural Season 5.
I do think the idea of Jack just like buggering off, never coming back, is kind of too depressing of an ending. It's not really like a epilogue to that, kind of like what El Camino with Breaking Bad or something. And I think like Miracle Day is sort of something like that.
That's what Brianna said. And like the thing is, I agree with that. This is something that we're probably going to have to get into once we talk about Miracle Day in detail. It doesn't feel like an epilogue to this. It feels like its own animal.
It feels like it's the start of a new series.
It kind of is.
Yeah, it is. But this, to me, like, even if this would be a very depressing ending for Jack, I think it makes sense. He's just moving on because there's no team.
I mean, this whole series is pretty depressing, honestly.
Oh, really? I thought it was very lighthearted. And
watching Cyber Woman depress me so much.
Children of Earth is really rad. It is, I think, kind of the apotheosis of Torchwood as a concept. And if it was gonna end here, I would feel like it really went out on kind of fully realizing the potential of its premise in a way that, like, Miracle Day also does not. Where, like, again, we'll get into this more later, but like how I mentioned that this is basically a miniseries length, alien-focused, galactic scale NCIS episode, Miracle Day is not that. It feels like Torchwood was trying to be this the whole time and should have always been this. And yeah, it's really great. It's really cool.
I'll just briefly say I didn't care for, like, well, I wouldn't say I didn't care for it, but I didn't really get into it until like the last two episodes where I felt like it was kind of interesting and everything. This overall, I don't know, like I said, I think it's much better than the first two seasons, which I didn't really like at all. So that's an improvement. I don't know, there's something off about Torchwood. I don't know if it's just a dryness, or I don't really care for the characters that much. I think that's probably it. I'm just not liking the characters all that much. And the theme of the show, well, I like this sometimes. It gets a little repetitive. Everything sucks.
My thoughts, I mean, I've always kind of considered Torchwood a little bit derivative, just in terms of premise and all that kind of stuff. But I think with this miniseries, it really like found its own voice. And I really like what they did with Frobisher. I like kind of the interesting moral questions they raise. It's a little clunky. It's a little 2000s, like, in how it handles this. There's not a ton of polish in some areas, but overall, it delivered on the shock. It delivered on the emotional catharsis, all that kind of stuff. So I really enjoy this miniseries, and it doesn't overstay its welcome the way that I feel Miracle Day does. No miniseries needs to be 10 episodes of this style. Like, you can do it in less time. It's very dark, but I always like my series to have that little bit of darkness, and I do like that we do get some kind of continuation just for the sake of Jack. But yeah, pretty good show overall, like this miniseries.
I think it's absolutely superb. One of the best things to ever come out of the Doctor Who universe. I think it's a really great story, really great premise, very good characterization. Exactly what Torchwood should have been from the beginning, I think. The way it's told, the way it's built up, absolutely fantastic.